Okay, well, let's get this started. Anyways, my name is Ian. We host this once a month, or almost once a month, every little bit, with Martha Muzzy and Kurt Thompson on the camera. Anyways, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our events coming up at the Blueberry Patch. One is this evening, open mic hosted by Barry Yertle, featuring Jerry Crescena. May 7th, Ragged Old Souls Band. May 11th, an open jam. May 21st and 22nd, it is closed, which is the first time, I believe, in the history of the Patch.
For Orange Blossom Jamboree, because they all go.
They all go. The first is open mic. The 5th is literary. Our next literary event hosted here at the Neptune Grill at 3. And Keep St. Pete lit. May 3rd, excuse me. Give Day Tampa Bay. May 7th, storytelling, artist crafting, fiction. And May 14th, how to publish a book at 1 p.m. And May 21st, poetic forms of haiku and huzzah. And these are all going to be hosted at the Moraine Arts Center. So I will read a quick little thing here. This is from the Scott and Buck book, A Brief English Grammar. Anyways, definitions. A noun is a word which names either a class or an individual member of a class. A proper noun is a name of a particular individual in a class. A common noun is a name of a class of things. A concrete noun is a common noun that represents some material things. An abstract noun is a common noun that represents a quality, an action, a state, or something of other intangible ideas. So we have a few readers today, Martha and Peter. But I'm going to start out with a little origin of Francis Scott Fitzgerald. There's been some interesting talk on second middle name of Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald. But anyways, he was born September 24th, 1896 to Edward and Mary Molly McQuinlan Fitzgerald in St. Paul, Minnesota. And let's see, Scott Fitzgerald's origin is that he'd lost both of his sisters before he was born. And his mother and father kind of doted over him a great deal because of the loss of these children. And he really believed he was a writer because of this loss. And his father and mother were from upper middle class Catholic family, and his father was in upper management with Procter & Gamble all of his life. And his mother came from immigrant parents who were in the wholesale grocery business, and made their millions doing that. So there was a little bit of money to throw around. His sisters' names, by the way, are Louise Scott Fitzgerald and Mary Scott Fitzgerald, and they both died very young. And he was raised initially in Buffalo, and then in Syracuse, and then back to Buffalo, and then of course to St. Paul, Minnesota. So, how did all this begin? He started education at Holy Angels Convent School in Buffalo. Of course, as I told you, they He moved from Buffalo to Syracuse and back to Buffalo again. So his very early education was marked with a lot of transition. And then ended up at Narden Academy. And he began writing about the age of 10. And I mean, he started journaling earlier than that, but again, all of those journals are lost. We don't know, we have no idea what happened to them. But we know where he began to do this, because he started to write for his prep school's newspaper. And they were critiques of other writers. Anyway, so he moved back to St. Paul, Minneapolis in 1908, and he graduated from St. Paul Academy in the class of 1911. He realized, okay, this is what he wants to do. I'm going to be a writer. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but it's going to be done. And he thought, well, maybe I can get into marketing and advertising, because this is something that was going on at the time. And he actually sent some material to Collier Weekly at that point. And he was young, like I said, 10 or 11, to see if they would publish it. And of course, they denied him. Not because of his age, because they didn't know his age. It was just tweak it a little bit more, and I think we might be able to accept it. Do a little revision. So ends up at when they go back to St. Paul, he ends up going to Newman School, which is Hackensack, New Jersey, and graduates in 13. And at that place, he began writing for their literary magazine called the Lit Mag, and he actually participated on the football team of years 12 and 13. And was duly accepted to Princeton University, and realized this is where he could do a great deal of his writing. And anyway, so he gets involved with the Princeton Triangle Club and the Tiger, which is their paper, the American Whig Society, the Nassau Lit Club, and the Cottage Club. And all of these kind of brought him into a literary circle of friends like John Peel Bishop and Edmund Wilson. And these two people he stayed friends with all of his life. And of course made friends with a number of other people. The Scribner boys, whose father owned Scribner's Publishing, and became really good friends with Ginny King, which a lot of his characters are based on. So anyways, 1917. What happens in 1917? A very, very productive year for him. Writes and publishes his first book called The Romantic Egoist. Gets on an academic probation. Drops out of Princeton and joins the Army, U.S. Army, and becomes a second lieutenant. And is assigned to Camp Sheridan, just outside of Montgomery, Alabama, where he meets and falls in love with Zelda Sayre, what has always been called his golden girl, who is, of course, the daughter of the Alabama Supreme Court Justice, Adult Sayre. Anyways, so does he see war? No. War ends in 1918. So he's discharged from the U.S. Army, and he moves to New York City. And this is where he says, "Okay, I'm going to launch my lucrative career in advertising." And so he starts with Barron Collier. And as I said earlier, he was friends with the Scribner boys, who are also friends with the Collier girls. And this is how he ends up working for them. And it was an absolute failure. And he was living at a single-room apartment in Morningside Heights, which is in the west side of Manhattan. And he says, well, I'm going to ask Zelda to marry me. So he proposes marriage. She accepts. And then within a few months, she says, I'm not marrying you. You don't make enough money. So what does he do? He moves back to St. Paul, Minneapolis, to his parents' home in Cathedral Hill. And he revises the romantic egoist and turns it into the side of paradise. And while he's doing this, he's not adverse to doing a little hard labor. He's working as a car roof repairman, the cloth top. So he sends in this copy to Scribner, and Scribner accepts it, and accepts this side of paradise. And this is where he meets Harold Ober and Maxwell Perkins, who he's on again, off again with, both in the publishing world and as friends. Anyways, 1920 it's published. And now this is one of the men of a time where most people who were writing in their lifetime didn't make a nickel. Unless you were writing for magazines or newspapers. This Side of Paradise is published in 1920, and he sells a little over 41,000 copies. So now he's in the money. And so who reappears in his life? But Zelda. And she accepts his second proposal. And they marry at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. And in 1920, he writes these little vignettes, which eventually turn into a larger book. But Head and Shoulders, Bernice Bobs Her Hair, The Ice Palace, and The Offshore Pirate. And those are published in Esquire and Collier Weekly. So now he's gaining ground. He's meeting the New York set, and Zelda's absolutely delighted. And in 1921, Frances Scott Fitzgerald is born, their daughter, on October 21st. And he writes a whole selection of short stories, Flappers and Philosophers, and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And then he begins to write for the Saturday Evening Post as a regular. And in 22, what do they decide to do? They decide to leave New York City for the beauty of Paris and the French Riviera. And this is where he meets Ernest Hemingway. Now, he and Ernest Hemingway had a wonderful relationship. The problem is that Hemingway hated Zelda. Almost with an incredible passion. Actually wrote a great deal about her and was quoted in the New York Times book review, New York Times review, that that Zelda Fitzgerald is insane. And then uses Zelda as a character in the Miserable Feast. Now, at this point in time, in 22, he also writes The Beautiful and the Damned, The Diamond as Big as the Ritz, Mayday, and Tales of Jazz Age, which is a collection of all of these previous short stories. So anyways, I'm going to leave you there, and I don't know who's coming up to read.
Tijan, this dream's where you belong. Your golden journey now has just begun. With your mother's arms to hold you, your brother's light to guide, your quest for wisdom will not be denied.